So, how about that? You need to go? Okay, go ahead. I don't know why they're taking you out of my classroom, but can't really see that very good. Okay. We don't do this with every president, guys. We won't go through their cabinet, okay? It'll really be Harding and Roosevelt administration where we'll get into like who their cabinet members are and their advisors and so forth. Because historians point to Harding and his administration as one of the most corrupt in American history. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why we're kind of digging into this. Now, some of his appointments were very good. It's the bad ones that really ended up costing Harding. Okay, so we start with Herbert Hoover, will be Secretary of Commerce. Now, Hoover, I think you know, is going to go on to become president. Okay, Charles Evan Hughes, Secretary of State. He has actually some good background here. He's well qualified. He helped with the peace treaty between Japan and Russia after the Russo-Japanese War. Hughes was involved with that. And then Andrew Mellon is, with two L's, is going to be the Secretary of Treasury. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Carnegie Mellon Institute. It's kind of a prestigious college. Mellon, interestingly here, is going to be the Secretary of Treasury under three different presidents, both Coolidge and Hoover. He will be the Secretary of Treasury. Now, that's very rare to see a cabinet person work in several administrations or multiple administrations. Most of the time, guys, they just serve like one term, and then the president will bring in new people. Some do a full 8 years as a cabinet secretary, but it's pretty uncommon, really uncommon to do multiple, okay? I can point back to when Obama was elected president, George W. Bush's Secretary of Defense was a guy named Bob Gates, okay? William Bob Gates. No, just Bob Gates. I want to say Bill Gates, but it wasn't Bill. Okay, Bob Gates. He's actually from Wichita. He went to East High. And when we had Afghanistan war going on and the Iraq war going on, Bush changed Secretary of Defenses. Gates was the president of Texas A&M University. And Bush tapped him to take over as defense secretary. Because we were in two wars, when Obama was elected, he kept Gates on as the Secretary of Defense. So that was like the only time in my lifetime that I remember that happening. Okay. So these are what some would say wise appointments. Where Harding really gets into trouble is with his poor appointment. His cronies. You guys know what a crony is? Like say somebody, like a rapper, makes it big, you know, grew up in LA, or in the hood, makes it big, his buddies, you know, his entourage, his cronies, the ones that follow him around, okay? You see this with new presidents all the time, is that when Harding comes from Ohio, he's going to bring Ohio people with him. When Bush came from Texas, brought people from Texas with him. These are people that helped him get to where he was in life. So he's going to reward them. He trusts them. He's going to reward them with jobs in Washington, D.C. Does that make sense? His buddies. Well, some of his buddies didn't do him any favors. Notoriously, Albert Fall is the Secretary of the Interior. Now, any idea like what the Secretary of the Interior does? What did they call you down to the office for?
CPO pass thing. Sports pass, I don't know.
You have to pick up an envelope.
That was important. Don't they have runners that can do that? I mean, they brought the pass. Couldn't they just brought the envelopes? pretty inefficient if you ask me. Any idea what the Secretary of the Interior does? They decorate the White House? No. So, think Teddy Roosevelt. National parks, okay? Federal lands. So if you go out to states, especially out in the West, like Nevada, you got Vegas, Reno, most of Nevada, most of that land is controlled by the federal government. Okay? New Mexico, similarly. Okay? You guys saw Oppenheimer, you know, there's a lot of wide open spaces over there. Okay? Now, what the Interior Secretary is charged with doing is leasing some of that federal land to private businesses, like ranchers. So you got a bunch of cattle. Your cattle need to eat. Yes? So you lease land from the federal government just for your cattle to graze on, and you pay the government money for that. It's a source of revenue for the government. Another source of revenue for the government here is leasing federal land for oil companies to explore for oil on federal lands. So oil companies paid leases. What Albert Fall was doing was giving leases to oil companies. He just wasn't telling anybody, and he was keeping the money for himself. Albert Fall went to jail. Now, how'd that make Harding look? Yeah, it made Harding look bad. Now, this guy, Harry Daugherty, the Attorney General, his only qualification, he helped Harding get elected. He was not qualified to be the Attorney General, which is the head of the Department of Justice. So he gets engulfed in scandal and actually tries to kill himself. How does that make Harding look? Now, I know you guys are all angels, but have any of you guys ever gotten in trouble because of who you were hanging out with in your lifetime? Okay, we got two that are willing, three. Yeah, that happened to me. Like 8th grade, I was hanging out with Ty Thixton, and I got in trouble at school, and I got paddled by the vice principal. Okay, and it hurt, and I cried, and I was in trouble. So I quit hanging out with Ty Thixton, which was a good thing, because he spent quite a few years in the penitentiary for murder. Now, I left that town when I was in my junior year of high school, so I stopped hanging out with Ty. And I only knew about this because I looked him up. I'm like, I wonder whatever happened to Ty Thixton. He owns a salvage yard now, outside of Indianapolis. Yeah. And then there's Marty, the other guy I was hanging out with, who also did time. Be careful who you hang out with. This is what happens to Harding. Okay? His little cronies are going to get him in trouble. In fact, they're going to get a nickname. The Ohio Gang. All his little cronies from Ohio. They're coming to D.C. They spend more time playing cards than actually doing their job. Probably drinking whiskey during Prohibition, smoking cigars, hanging out. Some of them use their position, like Fall, to enrich themselves. Nobody ever goes to Washington, D.C. to enrich themselves, do they? The United States Senate is a millionaires club. If you're not a millionaire when you go there, you'll leave a millionaire, even though you only make $174,000 a year. I wonder how that happens. How do they all get so rich while they're in Congress? Oh, they make laws that affect different sectors of the economy. And they can, yes, make investments based on the laws that they're going to pass before people know they're going to pass them. Nancy Pelosi. You want a good stock portfolio? There's a guy you can follow on Twitter that follows Nancy Pelosi's investments. So you can buy him too. Now, she used to be the Speaker of the House. She's not anymore, so she doesn't control that legislation. Fat stacks of cash. So this is going to make Harding look bad and actually will help lead to his death. Okay? Now, when we get to government class next semester, you're going to need to know all 15 cabinet departments. So let's play a little word fill in the blank. I say Secretary of, and you fill in the blank. Secretary of, you can't use any of these. Up there. Defense. What? War, it used to be war, now it's defense. Secretary of, that's state. What?
Housing.
Housing and Urban Development, HUD. Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary of. No, it's an agency. Education, Secretary of Energy, Labor, Health and Human Services, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Secretary of Transportation. Yeah, guys, the federal government is huge. Okay, somebody mentioned FDA. Well, there's a bunch of those. FBI, CIA, FTC, FCC, FAA, yada, 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 yeah. Hundreds and hundreds of federal agencies. These are the big ones. Okay. Our government's huge. It's the largest employer in the country. Federal government employs, the executive branch of government employs more people than Walmart. More people than Amazon. It's the largest employer. 3 million people that work for the federal government. Now that includes Pentagon, the Defense Department, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, and of course, Space Force. Which, yes, it cracks me up every time I say it. Okay. All right. So, guys, we're going to go across the pond for a minute and look at foreign policy. Now, what did I just mean by going across the pond? Across what body of water? The Atlantic, yes. Who likes to use that term? The pond? The British, yes. So I'm going across the pond, I'm going to do some foreign policy, all right? Now, remember, I talked about the horrors of World War I. 40 million casualties, 8 to 9 million war-related combat deaths, okay, disease, and amputations. A daily reminder of the war on the streets of the world, okay? So people don't want that to happen again. So we're going to see a series of treaties and pacts that are going to try and prevent those wars from happening again. We're going to touch on a couple of them. Most notably, this one, the Five Power Treaty, and a little bit later, something called the Kellogg-Briand Pact. Now, this treaty, this Five Power Treaty, is a disarmament treaty, meaning disarming, reducing weapons. The idea is if you have fewer weapons, the less likely you are to go to war. Does that make any sense? Maybe. Maybe not. Will it work? Now, the notes here say the first successful disarmament treaty in history. In this case, guys, we are disarming our navies. We are shrinking the size of the number of warships that we have. The hope is, the smaller our navies, the less likely we are to go to war. Now, how do you measure a ship? By how much water it displaces. So if you're 6'5", 300 pounds, you get in the bathtub, the water's going to overflow. If you're 5'4" and you weigh 100 pounds, it's not going to overflow. Okay, so just bring in a little science, the history class called cross-curricular learning, displacement. Okay. Now, these 5 countries agree to do this. So they've all signed the document. Now, the question that should be asked is, what if one of these 5 countries, US, Great Britain, France, Italy, or Japan, violate this treaty? What happens to the country that violates the treaty? Do we say one of them violated? Are we going to war with that country? Is there teeth? Is there backbone to this piece of paper? Or is it just a piece of paper? What are we trying to avoid in the first place? Yeah, conflict, war. So if we put teeth in this and say, we're going to war with you if you violate this, then we're getting what we didn't want to begin with. Now, you could say, okay, if you violate this, Japan, we're not going to trade with you anymore, which could lead to a conflict, which we don't want. So the fact of the matter is, guys, this type of treaty is hard to enforce. There's no teeth in it, no backbone to it. Okay? Now, guys, from 1919 to 1931, we're going to have relative peace on the planet. No major wars. In 1931, that's going to change. When Japan is going to invade China in 1931, okay, the peace will end. And then 10 years later, 1941, Japan will attack the United States. Okay, so we know that's coming down the pipe. So was it this treaty that provided for a decade of peace, or was it kind of like the fact that nobody wanted to have another world war for a while that gave us a decade of peace? I don't know if you can give credit to this treaty. Japan, guys, wants to industrialize. They have not industrialized like Europe and the United States have yet. So, they have a problem. Japan has a problem. They're an island, which means they have a lack of what? Space and natural resources. So they got to either be really good at trade, have something themselves to trade, or they got to go get some natural resources by force. But the fact is, guys, the lesson I'm really trying to get you to learn here is this. There's no real way short of conflict to enforce this treaty. So one of these 5 is going to be the first to violate this treaty. And it's not Japan. Which country besides Japan is going to be the first to violate this? Not Italy, that's a good guess. Not the US. Not Great Britain.
France.
Mr. Ebright? I was going to say France. Yeah, you're right, France. Okay? Now, why would the French violate this treaty? Because of, first one mentioned, Italy. Who comes to power in 1922 in Italy? Benito Mussolini. Okay? Everybody in here heard of Benito Mussolini? Heard him? Heard him? Heard of him? What do we know about Mussolini other than that he's a thug? He's a what? He's a fascist. In fact, he's the first fascist. He's the one that comes up with the name fascism in Italian. I can't pronounce. So in 1922, the black shirts, as they called them, okay, took over Italy. Now Mussolini is talking about building a new Roman Empire. This fascist. Now the term fascism, guys, was not a dirty word in 1922, in 1925, in 1933, when Hitler came to power, fascism still wasn't a dirty word. In 1936, Hitler used fascism to get them out of the Great Depression by 36. We were still mired in it. So people were looking at fascism as a legitimate option to get them out of the Depression. It's not till 1937, 38 that fascism becomes the dirty word it is today, when Hitler and Mussolini start invading other countries. Then fascism gets a bad name. Okay? Now, we like to use this term a lot today. Oh, Trump, he's a fascist. Obama, he was a fascist. What? What are you talking about? You wouldn't know fascism if it slapped you across the face. Most people have no idea what it is. They love to say, call people. They don't even understand it. That's why I'm here. Okay? We'll do a deep dive on it a little bit later, but I want to explain this to you. Here's a good definition of fascism. Supercharged nationalistic statism. We talked about communism, right? No private property, government managed economy. So Moscow decides everything. Under fascism, guys, you retain private property. You own your own business, but the government directs everything. The state directs everything. So private property ownership, state directed. Now, we talk about nationalism. So we're talking about Nazi Germany, not Germany, Nazi Germany. You follow me? Extreme nationalism. Now, there are four characteristics to fascism. One, you need a strong leader, a leader that is loved. The leader is the same as the government. The leader is the same as the nation. They called Hitler the Führer, the leader. Okay? He is equal to the nation. He is the nation. Fascism can only exist in a crisis. Now, that crisis could be economic, could be a war, could be a pandemic, but you need a crisis. Otherwise, people will not give up their authority to government unless there's a crisis, you understand? 3, fascism is characterized by action by the leader, by the government. We will cede power to that leader because of the crisis. Example, Mr. Ibrahim. Example. During the Civil War, President Lincoln suspended what? Habeas corpus, which means they can detain you indefinitely without charging you with a crime. Ladies and gentlemen, if you get arrested by the police, they got 72 hours to charge you with a crime or they got to cut you loose. That's habeas corpus. Lincoln suspended that because of the crisis. And we let him do it. During World War II, the government controlled the media. Franklin Roosevelt, with some help of the governor of California, Earl Warren, they rounded up Japanese Americans and put them in camps without charging them with a crime. Again, suspending habeas corpus. Am I calling Lincoln and Roosevelt fascists? No. But what I will tell you is that there is something called temporary fascism. Okay? 9/11, Patriot Act. Fourth Amendment protects us from illegal search and seizure. That if the government wants to search you, they have to get a warrant. They were able to do that without a warrant, using secret courts and so forth. Crisis, symbol of the American flag. Under Roosevelt, other things we'll talk about, the Blue Eagle of the National Recovery Administration. Okay? Fascism has been seen in different periods, different times, but none of those leaders were fascists. Okay? Donald Trump is not a fascist. Is he a nationalist? Yes. Make America great again. It's a nationalistic theme. Okay? But what Trump wanted to do was weaken the state, the federal government, and return power to the states, taking it away from the federal government. Statism is making the federal government very powerful, dictating to people what they can and can't do. Okay, that's fascism. We've never had a fascist president. Okay? We've had elements of fascism in the States during different periods of history. If that makes sense. Does that make sense? We'll dig into it more later. Okay, so Mussolini wants to build a new Roman Empire. You tell me, was France ever part of the Roman Empire? What is modern day France? Did it fall under the heel of the Romans? Of course it did. So France is saying to itself, why are we destroying our navy right now when we got this thug on our southern border that wants a new Roman Empire? That might be suicide for us. So, do you give French credit here for violating this treaty? I do. Pay attention because this may be one of the only times I give any credit to the French. We're running out of time? No way! Okay. Dang. Okay, we're going to get into, come back across the pond. Real quick, 4 things that Harding's going to want to accomplish domestically. Higher tariffs, lower taxes, less government. He's a Republican. Number 2 and 3 go right along with Republicans. Okay? Aid to disabled soldiers from the war and helping farmers. This is what both parties want to do. Okay? But we're going to focus on tariffs. Okay? Your learning intentions today, we covered corruption, domestic policy, a little bit of foreign. This is domestic policy. We'll get into more tomorrow. And identifying the players in the Harding administration, matching on the test. I will give you a little biography. You match it with the person. So Secretary of Commerce, later President, Herbert Hoover. Okay? You can do that on a test. Okay? Now, I'm going to ask you to describe, especially these tariffs, okay, when we get to it tomorrow. Okay? So, I'll probably leave the same learning intentions up tomorrow. And we'll get in, we'll break down each one of these tomorrow. Okay?
We're pretty much caught up.
Great.